This episode is brought to you by Katana, a DeFi-first chain built for deep liquidity and high yield. You'll be hearing more from them later in the show. Blockworks Digital Asset Summit, which is crypto's premier institutional event, is back in London October 13th to 15th. It'll have speakers from leading global funds, financial institutions, DeFi protocols, crypto companies, and policymakers. Think BlackRock, Circle, Coinbase, the UK Parliament, Jito and Marinade, all under one roof. Notable names include Joe Lubin from Consensus, Hadley Stern from Marinade, Rebecca Reddick from Jito Labs, a whole bunch of Blockworks folks, and more to come. There's a VIP dinner October 13th, open to speakers and VIP ticket holders only. That will sell out, so act fast. And it's all going down at Old Billingsgate, London. Use the code LIGHT100 for £100 off at checkout. We'll see you there. Nothing said on Lightspeed is a recommendation to buy or sell any investments or products. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and the views expressed by anyone on the show are solely their opinions, not financial advice or necessarily the views of Blockworks. Our hosts, guests, and the Blockworks team may hold positions in the company's funds or projects discussed. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed. I'm your host, Jack Kubinek, joined today by a very special guest. We have SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce, aka Crypto Mom. This is a very, very fun one I've been looking forward to for some time. So Commissioner Peirce, thanks for coming on the show.
Jack, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you. I'm going to start with my disclaimer, of course, which is that my views are my own views as a commissioner, not necessarily those of the SEC or my fellow commissioners.
We're recording this on a Friday, September 5th, and it's kind of a fun day to be recording because earlier today, the SEC and CFTC put out a joint statement that kind of was making the rounds on the crypto internet. It basically said that as opposed to working against each other in separate silos, as may have been the case previously, the SEC and CFTC are going to try to work more in lockstep to regulate financial markets and particularly in the crypto realm. And I think this is just an interesting place to begin because when I started reporting on crypto, the general sense that I got was that crypto wanted to be regulated by the CFTC because it was perceived as being friendlier to the industry than the SEC was. Bitcoin CME futures were approved like 7 years before the Bitcoin spot ETFs, for instance. And so I just want to get your perspective as someone who kind of lived through this era. You were appointed to the SEC in 2018, I believe. Mm-hmm. Yep. What has it been like historically between the SEC and the CFTC, and how do you see that kind of shifting going forward?
The SEC and CFTC, because our jurisdictions are so tightly connected to one another, have had a lot of touch points over the years, and sometimes the relationship has been more strained than others. But I mean, it's understandable because we have these jurisdictions where it's not always immediately obvious what which one of us should regulate something. I routinely have interactions with people in the traditional financial world where they're wondering or they're disagreeing or asking that a product be regulated or not be regulated by us. So it's not unusual for there to be hard questions for us to have to resolve. I have definitely had good moments of working with the CFTC. In fact, the nominee for the CFTC, Brian Quintens, was a commissioner at the CFTC earlier in my tenure here as a commissioner at the SEC, and we worked closely together around issues related to security-based swaps and swaps, another area where it's sometimes difficult to know who had jurisdiction over what. And so we were able to work well together and try to bring our regimes into closer alignment. And so I think that is the type of working relationship we're trying to reproduce here. In fact, earlier in my tenure, we did have a joint public meeting with the CFTC. And that was, I think, a good moment. We just announced that we'll be having a roundtable with the CFTC coming up. And so I'm expecting that close relationship that we're working on now will mirror some of those earlier experiences of working together. That's what the American people expect, is for us to not fight over jurisdiction, but to do what's best for the markets in the U.S. And I think we're we're well on the way to doing that.
Sure. And forgive me, Commissioner Peirce, but we're a more like niche podcast, I guess, at Lightspeed than many in the crypto industry. And so I actually realized I maybe shouldn't assume that everyone sort of knows who you are and what you do. So before we go on, could you just briefly explain, I guess, what a SEC commissioner is and does and what most of your work is taken up with day to day?
The SEC is the Securities and Exchange Commission, which oversees the stock market. So we oversee exchanges, we oversee investment advisors, we oversee broker-dealers, self-regulatory organizations that regulate broker-dealers, for example. We oversee a whole range of issues related to disclosure. So disclosure by public companies, disclosure by mutual funds. And so a piece of what we do is crypto, but much of what we do is not. We have an official 3-part mission: protecting investors, facilitating capital formation, and fostering orderly and efficient markets. So basically market integrity. And so that mission has intersected with crypto, which is how I've ended up spending a fair amount of my time thinking about crypto. Now I'm leading the crypto task force at the SEC. As probably most of your listeners know, the last several years have not been particularly good for the relationship between the industry and the SEC. And so we're really trying to turn that around. And that's part of what I'm doing in my current job. But my day job really is there. 5 commissioners typically, and we vote on everything. So we vote on all of the enforcement actions the agency takes. We vote on all the rules that the commission adopts. And so I'm spending a lot of time reviewing those things, meeting with people inside and outside the commission, talking to them about those things, and trying to develop good policy ideas.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. And then for people in the Solana world, I suppose the reason the SEC would be relevant to you is that under the prior SEC regime, there were a pair of lawsuits against Coinbase and Binance in which the opinion was expressed that Solana is a security. And so those exchanges were, fostering the sale of unregistered securities. And so this, caused Solana to be delisted from Robinhood and so forth. And now fast forward to the present, that opinion has sort of shifted. And as well as the question of liquid staking has been clarified recently by the SEC, which I thought was very interesting. And we can get into at some point. But that's a little bit of an overview of, I guess, how the SEC would be relevant to our listeners in the Solana world. Here's a random one, Commissioner Peirce. Are you on crypto Twitter much? Just a personal curiosity of mine.
So I am on Twitter, and I do follow some of what happens on crypto Twitter, but I can't say that I'm on it all the time, reading everything everyone says. It is definitely a nice, vibrant community of people who like to call each other out, which I think is kind of fun. But I'm not a religious follower of it.
Do you enjoy being on there, or do you feel like you should be for work reasons?
Oh, I mean, I enjoy my work. So I everything that I do, well, not everything, but most of the things I do for my job I like. But yeah, I mean, sure, I enjoy being able to hear what people have to say. And sometimes it's been quite useful because I hear about what people don't like about what the SEC is doing. And that also is quite valuable. So yeah, I enjoy that aspect.
Okay, interesting. You're more positive on CT than I probably would have imagined ahead of time.
I mean, I think sometimes too, sometimes it's just people being mean to each other, which I don't particularly love. I think that's not really that productive. But I think sometimes there's a kernel of truth in what people are saying, even if they're saying it in a way that I wouldn't prefer them to say it. And I, that is one of the things that I've said to my colleagues over the years too. We come in as a government regulator and we say, oh, we don't like everything that's going on in the crypto world. It's so terrible. And people are all these bad things are happening. And my response has always been, look, yes, there are bad things happening in the crypto world, as there usually are when humans are involved in any area of life. Bad things happen. But one thing I do like about the crypto world is that people are willing to call each other out for those bad things. And so you do get a measure of sort of self-correction that is in many ways more effective than regulation could be, because regulation is just slower and it's maybe not as direct. And I think one interesting part of the crypto world is this whole idea of, there are people who like one chain versus another, and they're fighting each other, and they're telling each other that, no, yours is too slow and yours isn't secure enough and yours is down all the time. And that's a good way of encouraging people to do a better job, right? So that they can then say, no, actually we're better and this is why, and everyone's using us and here's why, and your future is down and ours is up. So I think all of that is kind of healthy competition.
Incubated by Polygon and GSR, Katana is something different, a purpose-built DeFi chain that's focused on giving the best experience possible. It does this by sustainably generating deep liquidity and sustainable, real yield. Katana is built from the ground up, with DeFi mechanics to keep your bags from just sitting idle. All you need to do is use your favorite protocol, and Katana mechanisms do the rest of the work for you. Katana is launching with a notable ecosystem of primitives, assets, and partners including Morpho, Sushi, Lombard, Chainlink, and Yearn. Katana is a DeFi-first chain, built for deep liquidity and real yield, by redirecting chain revenue back to active DeFi users. The 1 billion CAT campaign is live. Bridge and deposit directly into vaults in one simple click, and start earning immediately on your ETH, BTC, USD, and more. Thank you to Eigenlayer for making this episode possible. Corporate and protocol treasuries face a major challenge today. Cash and traditional instruments are losing ground to inflation. ETH, SOL, and other proof-of-stake digital assets offer a unique solution: exposure to the asset's performance, along with access to long-term, sustainable staking rewards that are uncorrelated to traditional interest rates. Using institutional-grade liquid staking tokens unlocks access to capital efficiency for advanced management strategies, while restaking provides the opportunity to participate in the core infrastructure powering the verifiable cloud. For CFOs, DATs, and corporate treasurers, the path to integrating liquid staking and restaking should be risk-managed and aligned with long-term strategic goals. The Productive Treasury Report outlines practical adoption and a forward-looking vision for the role of the modern treasury as a strategic enabler of new technology. Thanks again to Eigenlayer for sponsoring this episode. As always, investments in blockchain technology involve risk. Terms and conditions apply. Do your own research.
I have one other pet peeve, which is that what I really dislike is when people are all upset about the government being involved and about the SEC doing all these things. When it comes to whatever their particular favorite crypto asset is, but then when it comes to other crypto assets, they want the power of the government to come down and shut it down. And I just think, let's at least have the same view of everything. Like, either government is involved or it's not involved. It's not, we're going to use government as a weapon against our opponents in the crypto world.
Yes. Oh, big time. Yeah. A very common thing we see. To broaden this conversation out a little bit, at the top of the episode, we alluded to this SEC and CFTC joint statement, and they sort of outlined in that statement a list of priorities of like questions that needed to be sorted out. And I think that it's an interesting moment to be talking about some of those questions because, when you began regulating crypto, probably the way you would define crypto is, peer-to-peer, a peer-to-peer cash network, or however Bitcoin is originally defined, right? And it's this way of people being able to send value around without centralized intermediaries. Today, crypto is a much broader thing than it used to be, and so that statement brings up perpetual futures as well as prediction markets as things that needed to be sorted out. And being a Solana podcast, Solana, I don't think wants to be Bitcoin. It doesn't want to be a sort of digital gold equivalent or only be a kind of peer-to-peer cash equivalent or something like this. It wants to be the place where, as Solana would say, internet capital markets happen. And so you have things like perpetual futures or prediction markets and loans. Like, all sorts of DeFi, all in this globally shared ledger, right? And it's not just based in the US, it's all over the world. So I guess I'm curious, like, your thoughts on some of these further out further down the curve, so to speak, crypto innovations like perps and prediction markets. And is your stance kind of different from, say, Bitcoin? Because I've heard you sort of speak positively about the virtue of, not needing to rely on intermediaries to transact, but things like perpetual futures are just a different thing altogether.
Yeah, and I mean, as a regulator, my role is really not to say what people should and shouldn't buy and what products are good and not. I do think it's fun to watch people innovating and developing new products that they think might be better than existing ones. And I think prediction markets are interesting. I think that they, as someone who believes strongly in this idea of dispersed knowledge across society, prediction markets are a way to pull together knowledge and put it in one place as people are weighing in on in prediction markets. And then, you have some sense of where people are, right? And that can be very valuable information. So I think those things are interesting. Whether or not they're within the SEC's jurisdiction is one question. And if they're not, I really don't have a lot to say on the regulatory front, other than I think it's wise for people to think about where those types of things fit within the existing regulatory framework and whether you have to register as something. And those are very hard questions in this context, right? If someone has to register, who is that person who has to register, and what are the implications? As you said, there's a lot of global activity, but a lot of that activity can flow back into the US through DeFi and in other ways. And so what are the implications when things flow back into the US? And so I think it poses some really fascinating challenges for both regulators and American citizens trying to use these things.
Speaking to more the regulatory side of things, my very left curve understanding of what the SEC does is it protects American investors. In the crypto realm, I think the history of crypto is littered with instances of fraud, from Mt. Gox to, famously FTX. A lot of people have lost a lot of money, not because necessarily the crypto tech is broken or there's anything inherently wrong with it, but because people said there was money where there wasn't. They were committing fraud. And so on a philosophical level, like, how do you approach the question of preventing fraud? Because, and therefore, I guess, protecting American investors? Because under the Gary Gensler SEC regime, I guess you could say that it was when the dial was turned all the way up and you saw all these enforcement actions against companies and so forth, it would have been very hard to defraud investors because you just couldn't run a crypto company in America. There's problems with this argument, of course. But in your view, now that the SEC has, I guess, loosened up its approach to crypto, like, what is the correct way that the SEC can prevent fraud?
There's a lot to that question. So first of all, I think a lot of bad things did happen under the hyper enforcement era that we were living in. And that's ironic because, that there are a lot of bad things about regulation by enforcement, but one good thing should be that you stop bad things from happening. But actually, bad things happened. So my theory on that is that if you create an environment in which you say to people, we're gonna go after folks in the crypto space who have, been there building a business, building a project for years, and they've built something that a lot of people are using for wanting to use it, right, and using it for their own benefit. And then, so these are the good actors who are actually building something that's useful to other people. And then the government comes in and brings an enforcement action to shut that project down. Whereas the one that went out there and put out a snazzy white paper and said, hey, we're going to do all these great things. Give us, we're selling you these tokens, give us your money. And then they just run off with the money. They're not the ones who are getting charged. It's the ones who have actually built something useful. That is not a good situation. then your enforcement resources are just going toward the wrong thing. So I do disagree that the old regime was a good one. Now, you're right, it did scare some people out of the US. It scared some people out of trying to build anything here at all, and they went and did something else. So I guess maybe that prevented some I think it prevented more good projects than bad. But anyway, putting that aside, now thinking about the here and now. First of all, it is not an anything goes world now. While we are doing a 180 on crypto in the sense of we're not trying to use regulation, we're not trying to use enforcement to write regulations, and we're not trying to shut down people who are trying to build useful things for other people to use. We are still very much in the business of going after people who are using in the name of crypto. They're using the name of crypto basically to defraud other people. I think that we have to tell people, though, that some of those things are not within our jurisdiction, and that is one thing that has changed. Right, under the prior administration, everything was being labeled to be a security, and that meant that our jurisdiction was broad and we could go after all kinds of things. If we take a more realistic and I would say legally sound view and say there are bounds to our jurisdiction that Congress gave us, we can't go after every fraud because some of it is just not securities fraud. So in that instance, we have to refer it to someone else, whether it's the criminal authorities, state authorities, or one of our fellow regulators, the CFTC or the FTC or the CFPB, whatever it might be. So we may not be the one to bring justice in those instances, but where things are within our jurisdiction and there's fraud, we're not stopping now because it's a new era. We still have enforcement tools and we will use them as appropriate.
Yeah. So point taken there that, the Securities and Exchange Commission would not regulate crypto tokens if crypto tokens are not securities in the way that it did under the prior regime. And that all makes sense and stuff. But it strikes me that we're sort of living through like a real-time experiment on whether this thesis is accurate, where if it is in fact the case that you're by pursuing this regulation by enforcement approach, you're essentially scaring off the good actors and maybe not even preventing the bad actors from operating in the US. If that is the case, then we would see like a decline essentially in crypto-related fraud under this sort of new direction for the US regulatory infrastructure. So just from your vantage point, does that seem to be the case so far to you? Like, do you think that this thesis has basically turned out to be true in the first 8 months of the new administration?
I mean, I think it is a little early to tell. And part of the reason is I do think there's some people who are out there who think anything goes now, right? This is the era of we can do whatever we want. And so there are some people who are out there doing terrible things in the name of crypto. And I'm encouraging people to come and tell us about those bad things that are happening so that we can go after them or, again, refer them to other people. It doesn't do anyone who's trying to build something good any benefit to have these bad actors running around. But I think the other thing that I worry about is it's been a long time now that it's been really hard to build good things in this space. And there have been, I mean, I'm grateful that there have been people who have persevered and tried to do that. But we have sort of created this environment that it's really hard to back out of now. An environment of building ephemeral things and then not really trying to think long-term because there was no point in thinking long-term because you were going to get shut down. I think it does take a little while to change that attitude. But I am really encouraging people, this is your moment to build interesting things, because if you don't build them now, and if the administration changes and goes back to one that is more interested in shutting crypto down than in building an environment in which good actors can thrive. There's going to be nothing to stop that administration from shutting crypto down if there's nothing good there. And I'm speaking, that's hyperbole. Obviously, there will be some good things there, but it really is the moment for people to sit down and build good things.
Is that necessarily true, though? Because I think that's a question I've developed over time as well. Is like there's this sense, right, where Trump is quite pro crypto, and the sorts of people that he's put into positions where they can regulate the crypto industry are quite pro crypto, and so maybe if a Democrat wins in 28, that gets reversed or something. But there's also things now like the Genius Act and upcoming Clarity Act that would be like genuine laws that feel like they'll be set in stone. So there's that piece. And I also was just curious, like, I'm sure as a regulator, you would like, once your term ends and so forth, for a lot of the work that you've done to continue on and not just be reversed in a day. So are there ways to actually make some of that regulatory work stick? And how are you pursuing that?
Yeah, great points. So the putting things into legislation does make it much more likely that they'll stick. And so I think that's why there's been such an effort to put the Genius Act out there and then to work on the Clarity Act and its companion work in the Senate to get the market structure set. And I think that will be very helpful. We at the SEC have been working hard on the crypto task force, and then across the SEC with staff across the SEC, you've seen certain statements coming out or to provide more clarity on certain things. And those have been staff statements by and large. And we're working toward more permanent types of documents. So that would be rulemaking, for example, where you're getting notice and comment from people and you're actually adopting a rule, and that is more permanent as well. I think we have to think about that. But I also think that there is a piece that is going to require people who are in the industry to show that when they have this good regulatory clarity, there is something really positive that comes out of it. I mean, that's just the reality, right? You want to make the case for your industry.
Yeah, I would certainly tend to agree. And it's almost interesting to play out the hypothetical of, if FTX hadn't been fraudulent, do we go down the same path that we went down with, countless SEC enforcement actions against crypto companies, some that maybe never came to light. But like, it seems like the public opinion piece of it is quite important. And
it is, yeah.
Yeah, you hope for that there's not another FTX-sized fraud, because it seems like it would do quite a lot of damage to the ability of kind of what the SEC is building in terms of an enforcement regime, sort of long term.
Yeah, and I guess that's another area that I think is important for people to think about, which is the public relations aspect, right? If FTX was a centralized entity, it was a centralized exchange, and it exhibited problems that have existed with respect to centralized entities for centuries, right? And this is a lot of the reason why people wanted to come in and use the new technology to try to get rid of these centralized intermediaries. Because when you have centralized intermediaries, they sometimes take people's money, they sometimes are careless, and they sometimes have conflicts, right? And so I hope that we also remember that is a key part of this. What people are trying to build here is something. It's not to say that all centralized intermediaries are going to go away, but that is one aspect of this that shouldn't be lost, right? If you just create a whole new set of centralized intermediaries, you will have another problem again in the future, because that's what happens with centralized intermediaries. And it's not to say they're all bad, but when you put human beings in the position of taking charge of other people's assets, sometimes they don't do good things with them. And so I think that's that's something that we should bear in mind. Don't just create a new system of centralized intermediaries.
Yeah, and one point I wanted to throw in here as well is it just felt a little insane in like 2023, 2024, where there were crypto projects that were founded by Americans. A lot of their staff was US based, but they sort of did this, I guess what we'd call decentralization theater, where they have a Caymans based entity or something like that. And they would release a token, and the token would not be allowed for US investors, but anybody with an internet connection can just get a VPN and get around that. And so it felt like this very, it set up this structure where, and not to mention that these tokens couldn't actually provide any types of rights to the token holders, which it's still a muddy area, obviously, but certainly not in the last regime. So it was just for fun. It was not for investment purposes. And a lot of people, I think, lost a lot of money, which is it's not like people didn't know what they were buying with a lot of these tokens, but it created a world where you couldn't even create anything else if you wanted to.
Yeah, I think that is really well said. And that is one thing that happens when you have bad regulations is people do a lot of work, right? There are a lot of lawyers that went into figuring this out, a lot of engineering to figure out how to build something that wasn't in the US, but and as you said, decentralization theater, you've got all these entities out there. So I don't want it, when I say we need to we shouldn't recreate centralized intermediaries. I also am not saying that people should rush to decentralize before that's the right thing to do. And for some projects, that will never be the right thing to do, right? There is a reason to have a centralized entity there. But I hope what we can do with a better regulatory structure is let people build in the way that makes sense for whatever problem they're trying to solve by building something. And sometimes that's going to mean, pieces of it are going to be centralized. Sometimes that's going to mean that you want to have a separate foundation entity, but maybe many times you'll decide that's not necessary. Sometimes you're going to decide, you know what, I don't mind if this asset is a security. I want it to have these rights to go along with it, which will make it a security. And that's okay, because now the SEC has designed a registration regime that actually works, and that we can register this and we can sell it, or we can rely on an exemption from registration in the US. So we don't have to worry as much about running into the securities laws. So I think if we get to that healthy place, then I'll be happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well put. So to move roughly chronologically here, we get into the early months of the Trump administration, and I think the most striking thing that the SEC began doing was dropping these enforcement actions and lawsuits. So maybe most famously, the Coinbase one, which dragged on and was a huge point of contention in the prior regime. There's also Binance, Ripple, Kraken, Helium, a laundry list of others that the SEC, I at this point, I think has dropped just about every enforcement that it was pursuing. I mean, surely not everyone, but a lot of the well-known ones. What was it like behind the scenes as that was happening? And because in my mind, it's almost just like a new week. You're like, okay, let's look into this lawsuit and see if there's any fraud going on or if we can dismiss it. And why was it important that the SEC did that, in your view?
It's a difficult position to be in, to be at a regulator that has been, and I had not been silent about this before, right? I had objected. Sometimes I couldn't object publicly, but I had objected to a lot of these cases because I thought we were getting ahead of ourselves in terms of, proclaiming all of these things to be securities, and we were telling people to come in and register, and there was no way to do it, and we were instead just bringing enforcement actions. And so when the Trump administration came in, and when we started to say we want to take a more legally precise look at how the law interacts with crypto, some of the conclusion that you come to is that actually these theories don't work with the enforcement actions that we're pursuing. And so in those instances, maybe you have to not move forward. But it is important to emphasize that each of these actions that we undertake is considered on its facts and circumstances. We have a very hardworking staff. Despite what some people in the crypto world think, we have a hardworking and dedicated staff here at the SEC. They try to follow the direction of the commissioners. As I said earlier in the show, it's the commissioners who vote on these enforcement actions, and the staff is just following the lead of the commission. And so we have to really think about each of these on its specific facts and circumstances.
Incubated by Polygon and GSR, Katana is something different, a purpose-built DeFi chain that's focused on giving the best experience possible. It does this by sustainably generating deep liquidity and sustainable, real yield. Katana is built from the ground up, with DeFi mechanics to keep your bags from just sitting idle. All you need to do is use your favorite protocol, and Katana mechanisms do the rest of the work for you. Katana is launching with a notable ecosystem of primitives, assets, and partners including Morpho, Sushi, Lombard, Chainlink, and Yearn. Katana is a DeFi-first chain, built for deep liquidity and real yield, by redirecting chain revenue back to active DeFi users. The 1 billion CAT campaign is live. Bridge and deposit directly into vaults in one simple click, and start earning immediately on your ETH, BTC, USD, and more. Thank you to Eigenlayer for making this episode possible. Corporate and protocol treasuries face a major challenge today. Cash and traditional instruments are losing ground to inflation. ETH, SOL, and other proof-of-stake digital assets offer a unique solution: exposure to the asset's performance, along with access to long-term, sustainable staking rewards that are uncorrelated to traditional interest rates. Using institutional-grade liquid staking tokens unlocks access to capital efficiency for advanced management strategies, while restaking provides the opportunity to participate in the core infrastructure powering the verifiable cloud. For CFOs, DATs, and corporate treasurers, the path to integrating liquid staking and restaking should be risk-managed and aligned with long-term strategic goals. The Productive Treasury Report outlines practical adoption and a forward-looking vision for the role of the modern treasury as a strategic enabler of new technology. Thanks again to Eigenlayer for sponsoring this episode. As always, investments in blockchain technology involve risk. Terms and conditions apply. Do your own research. I, for one, think the world of your staff. I'll say that for the record.
I appreciate that.
Think highly of all them. So these enforcement actions were dismissed. And then moving down the line a little bit here, actually, to not move on too much, you have the crypto task force, which was this kind of new SEC initiative that was announced, to my understanding, and you had lots and lots of meetings. I had the tab bookmarked on my laptop, and I would look at it from now and again, because you would kind of list every meeting that you had with crypto people and what was talked about. And there were tons of these things, and lots of like random crypto startups that are not, Andreessen or Coinbase trying to come use its political clout in Washington. So I just wanted to ask a little bit about that period of time as well, and if there were any broader learnings or impressions that you gained from having all of those meetings with crypto folks.
Well, that period is still going on, and so we do encourage people to come. Well, I say that because I do encourage people to come in, and you can go to the Crypto Task Force webpage and you can request a meeting. You can put in written input, which is what a lot of people choose to do instead of or in addition to meeting. But I think it's helpful for me to understand where are the frictions in the existing legal structure. And I knew going into this new administration that one thing we were going to run into is that people have been saying for years, provide us clarity, provide us clarity. We can't do it under the existing rules. We need new rules. And I knew that we would get into the new administration, and then I would say, okay, now what do we need to do, right? You said we needed new rules. You said you needed clarity. Where do you need clarity? Where are new rules? And people would be a bit unprepared for that because it's just been so depressing over the past, several years. And it seemed so hopeless and pointless to think of good regulatory solutions. And so part of what we're trying to do with the meetings is really drill down and understand what are people trying to build? How would they ideally build it for commercial long-term viability if the rules weren't the barrier? And how can we then construct the rules so they don't serve as a barrier? That's not saying that you get a free pass just because you slap crypto on something and then you get to do whatever you want, forget whatever the existing securities laws are. We can't do that. But we do have a fair amount of exemptive authority at the SEC that we can use. We have the ability to talk to people. What exactly are they trying to do? And we can say, hey, looking at what you promised to do and what the conditions are here, we wouldn't recommend an enforcement action here. And then as we try to develop these rules to, as you say, be more sustainable and more long-term, we want to make sure, because they will be hard to change, we want to make sure that they actually work for what people actually need to do and want to do. And so having a lot of these meetings, not just with the people who come to Washington all the time, and I'm grateful for anyone who comes to talk to us, the people who come to Washington all the time and the people who are not able to come to Washington, and I go out and meet with them and wherever they are. But we really do need that input, because otherwise all of the effort on our part will be wasted, because we'll build something that people won't be able to use.
And so you mentioned you kind of went into this hoping that people could explain or just get a sense of where people are with respect to how they're thinking about regulation. I'm sure you went in with certain impressions of what people might think or say, and I'm curious, like, did the expectation match the reality, or were there certain surprises in the types of things that crypto projects were thinking and talking about with you all?
Well, I think one surprise is that people really haven't thought as much about the precise legal implications of what they might do. And so I think we've seen this, for example, in the area of tokenization, where a lot of people thought, they're experimenting, thinking, how can we get a traditional security onto on-chain, and so somehow we want to tokenize it. And there hasn't been a lot of really precise thinking about what exactly is someone getting when she's buying a token that is supposedly representative of a security. And I don't fault people for that, because again, I think it's a time where there's a lot of creativity and people are trying to think about how to do this the best way, and you're going to get different experiments running. My only point is that we have to make sure that the people buying these things understand what exactly they're getting. So I think that's one piece of it. Another thing that really has struck me is that I have started to, and you alluded to this earlier, I've started to wonder what we would have if people really could have built things the way they wanted to. Would we have more rights running with tokens if people had been able to do that in a way that wouldn't have made it, again, commercially impossible and regulatorily impossible? And so I find it interesting to think about, what is that state going to look like? What kinds of rights will be running with tokens, and how will people who will want to hold those tokens, and how involved will they be in governance and things like that?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I would agree that it feels like if we're headed towards a kind of tokenized stock era, it is going to be classified by a bit of confusion. And I think we saw that a little bit when Robinhood hilariously tokenized OpenAI's stock. And then after this kind of promotional event came out, OpenAI tweeted and said, no, never mind. No one told us that our stock was being tokenized. And so there is probably a lot of thorny questions to iron out once all of that comes out. I do want to move on just because we're running a little short on time. Liquid staking is a big one that Solana people are probably very interested in. Jito, I know, is one of maybe the earlier projects to meet with the task force and talked to you all about liquid staking. And just in the past few weeks here, the SEC officially clarified that it believes that liquid staking tokens are not securities. So can you walk me a little bit through your own, I guess, journey and view on liquid staking tokens?
I mean, there is a way to look at the securities laws that they're very, very expansive, and you can pull everything in. And I think we need to really look at each thing that comes before us and analyze, does it make sense for the securities laws to cover this? And with respect to liquid staking, when you look at what it actually is, it's really a technical service, as opposed to, and of course, facts and circumstances matter. And I think that staff statement made that very clear. You can design anything so that it's a securities offering. But if you're really offering just a technical liquid staking service, that just doesn't make sense to regulate that like a securities product. And so that's really what we were getting at there, and that's kind of how I approached it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. And I think that's been one of the other kind of striking things, because it just felt so. We didn't get staked ETH ETFs when those came out, and now it just seems like the thinking on staking has really changed. And there was a ETH SOL ETF application we saw just in the past couple of weeks, I believe. So clear that things are very much changing in that sector.
And that was something that we had heard about too, even when those first ETPs were approved, is that people wanted to be able to stake because, a fiduciary managing one of those funds might believe it really should be maximizing the value of for investors, and so staking enables them to generate a higher yield.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you have concerns about tokenized stocks, like in theory? Because there's been a lot of buzz around tokenized equities, I guess, in the past several months here. I think the critiques of them range from like, why does this need to exist? The stock market works okay as it is, unless you're, not US based, and then maybe you would want to get access to Tesla stock through a tokenized equivalent or something like that, to more like serious concerns that, I don't know, you run the risk of very fragmented liquidity and poor spreads, or, the price of the tokenized stock becomes depegged from the underlying stock itself. So I guess, like, what's your level of interest or concern in tokenized equities as these things start to kind of roll out in a more serious way?
I have concerns about everything. I think we need to be thinking about not only the enthusiasm and excitement, but also the problems that are associated with anything. And I put out a statement on tokenized securities, just a brief statement to say, hey, don't assume that it's magic, right? If you take something and you tokenize it, and it's a secure, you take a security, you tokenize it, it's likely still going to be a security. And so you have to think about all the rules that might apply. And it might be a different kind of security. You might take a share of stock and tokenize it. It could turn into a security-based swap. You could be offering someone a share of an SPV, not the share of the stock that's sitting in the SPV. People better know what it is that they're buying. You better tell them what they're buying. They better understand what their rights are to that underlying stock. And then you raise the issue that I think is also important, which is, what is this going to mean for liquidity? What is it going to mean for the equivalence? How are people going to treat the untokenized stock the same as the tokenized stock? Is it going to be one big liquidity pool? Or are we going to have this fragmentation? How is that going to be arbitraged? Those are important questions as well. And I actually think the questions around, well, what's the point, are fair questions too. It may not be that tokenizing stock is the answer. Some people think everything is going to be tokenized. That may be the case. I think my role as a regulator is just to enable people to try these things, to build the room for people to experiment. And if it works, if there's a market demand for it, then to build a path to have a long-term regulatory solution within which those things can be created and offered. And we're obviously doing it with a recognition that there are people who are not planning to tokenize securities, who want to make sure that there's no unfair, unlevel playing field. We have to think about that as well. But I think, as with many technological changes, it can be a moment for us to think, do the existing rules make sense for anyone? Should we change them for everyone? So it can be a healthy moment for us to reconsider our rule book and see what should go and what should stay. But yes, I am certainly paying attention to this, and we're working quite deliberatively. We're meeting with a lot of people. We're thinking carefully about how to do this. And I urge people who are interested in tokenizing to come talk to us about how they want to do it, to think through with us, and before you come talk to us, what some of the regulatory challenges might be, And I think that's how we can do this in a way that's safe and that will ultimately show whether or not there's a market for this.
And there would probably be a hurdle around non-US people buying US equities as well, right? Because I would think in the current world, there's like a tax implication of this. I candidly have not tried to do it, but I would think that's a question.
Well, I mean, the tax, I can happily say, is outside of my purview. But I think one thing, too, to remember is that if things are happening overseas and they're flowing back to the U.S., that is also something that the issuer of those tokenized securities needs to be thinking about. There can be real legal considerations there. And then there are questions around, we're so used to dealing with intermediaries, and I know I keep going back to this, but I think this is something we have to think about too. We're not used to a world in which people can make peer-to-peer exchanges of things. And so there are a whole range of issues that arise there as well, including the one that you raised, that some of the purchasers might be outside the US.
Mm-hmm. I want to close here just by thinking a little bit about legacy. So in other interviews, you've indicated that you're not going to seek another term, even if it was possible. I don't exactly know where we sit with when you were appointed and where we are today. Your term technically concluded, I guess, in June, but you can stay on for an additional 18 months as a successor is looked for. So knowing that, your days in the SEC might not last forever, I guess, if you depart the agency, like what is it that you want to be remembered for, or how is it that you want people to think of you that have kind of worked with you over the years?
Well, my days definitely are numbered. So I certainly think it's time for someone else to be in this job. And I'm not saying that I want to leave tomorrow. I have things that I'm trying to do here, but it is time for someone new to come, for a new voice, for fresh ideas to come in. I think that's the point of these roles. They're not intended to be permanent. They're intended to make sure that we're having lots of good ideas coming from the public, right? And it's always good to get new voices in. In terms of legacy, I don't really care what people think about me particularly. I think what matters is that this institution has the opportunity to turn over a new leaf. I think we made some real mistakes in how we approach crypto and frankly, some other things as well. And I hope that we will take a better approach and that we will, by doing that, really fulfill the mandate that was given to us by Congress and therefore by the American people to create good rules within which the capital markets can thrive and can serve the American public well. I took this job because I think the capital markets are an amazing treasure of the United States. It's a way for people to be able to build businesses by drawing on money from investors who are not related to them. You don't have to know someone rich in order to build a good business in the US. You can go to the capital markets and people will give you money because they think your idea is good. And so I really want to see that regulatory function working well so that the capital markets can flourish, and that would make me happy. And I don't think it really matters whether I'm sitting in this seat or not. I just want to see things working well.
Great. Well, Commissioner Peirce, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. That's all the time we have for today, but it's been a really fun one, and I appreciate you coming on Lightspeed.
Thanks for having me, Jack. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. If you made it this far in the episode, we'd love if you gave this show a thumbs up or a 5-star wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, and we will see you all again very soon.